Pull out your last fuel receipt. Roughly half of it is tax, and not 1 cent of that was ever put to a vote. Now snap the timescale before you settle in. The young men who fought the First World War were dead for decades, most of them buried under fields in France, before Britain made the final payment on that war in 2015. Think about that. A soldier's grandchildren were grown adults, with mortgages and grey hair, before the country he died for closed the books on it. And the war's being fought right now. They aren't being paid for honestly either. They're being charged forward, onto debt, into the price of fuel, into a general pool that nobody ever has to name at the pump. So this thing in your hand isn't a fuel bill, it's a repayment schedule. You just can't see which war you're paying off. I'm at the bottom of the world, in New Zealand, watching the back end of a financial system designed 100 years ago, and a hemisphere away. And from down here you can see something the people who built it would rather you didn't. A war is bought on credit, and the bill outlives the soldiers. Let me give you the line that makes everything else make sense. There is the day a war ends, and there is the day a war is paid for, and those two dates can be 30 to 100 years apart. Start with how it used to be done, because it used to be done honestly-ish. When the United States entered the First World War, it asked its own people to fund it. Not metaphorically, literally. Around 2/3 of that war's cost was borrowed straight from the public through Liberty bonds, and about a quarter came from taxes. 5 drives, the 4 Liberty loans plus the Victory loan of 1919, raised over $21 billion. Roughly 20 million Americans bought in. That's a war the public could see, because the public was holding the paper. Then it got more honest, not less. The Second World War was the first American war, funded mostly through income tax. One rigorous estimate, from Hall and Sargent, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, puts the split at about 61% taxes, 28% war bonds, and the rest conjured from money creation. And I'll be straight with you, those percentages move, depending on which scholar you ask, and whether you count inflation as a hidden third tax. But the direction is clear. The debt peaked at around 119% of GDP in 1946, up from about 50% 5 years earlier. A country that taxed itself and borrowed from itself in the open. Korea went further still. Truman ran it on a deliberate pay-as-you-go basis. Congress raised taxes 3 separate times. The top income rate was shoved up to 91%, and the most tax-financed war America fought in the modern era was the one nobody made a film about. So here's the contrast, and it's the whole story. Through all of that, paying for a war was a political act. Somebody had to stand up in front of voters and say, "This will cost you. Here is the bill. Sign here." And then somebody learned they didn't have to do that anymore. The drift starts with Vietnam. Lyndon Johnson wanted guns and butter, war and welfare, and he did not want to ask anyone to pay for either. The tax surcharge to fund it, a 10% add-on, didn't arrive until 1968, when most of the war had already been borrowed. Pay late, and you pay twice, because the bill for that dishonesty showed up as inflation. On the annual averages, it climbed past 4% in 1968 and pushed towards 6% by 1969. The cost didn't vanish, it just changed costume. And then comes the masterclass. The post-9/11 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were funded almost entirely by borrowing. For the first time since the Revolutionary War, America fought major wars while cutting taxes, not raising them. Cutting them in 2001 and again in 2003. The Costs of War project at Brown University, and I'll flag they lean toward the higher end of these estimates, calls them the credit card wars. Their figure for the total is around $8 trillion. Roughly $5.8 trillion in actual spending, plus at least $2.2 trillion in veterans, care already owed, but mostly not yet paid. Here is the part that should make the hair on your arms stand up. Those wars were bought on debt, and debt charges interest. Over $1 trillion in interest has already been paid. By 2030, the interest alone will roughly equal what the fighting cost. And by 2050, the interest could top $6.5 trillion. The soldiers who fought after 2001 will be old men before that bill is closed. Possibly dead, like the ones from 1918. Same trick, newer coat of paint. Now look at Britain, because Britain is the proof of how long this tale really is. Those grandkids I mentioned weren't a figure of speech. Britain only finished repaying its Second World War loans from the Americans and Canadians on the 29th of December, 2006. A final payment of about $83 million. And the First World War debt, the domestic war loan, was only redeemed in March 2015. In July of that year, the Treasury cleared the last old gilts entirely, some dating to the 18th century. Around £2.6 billion of historic debt, finally gone. But I have to be honest with you because this channel only works if I am. The popular line that Britain finished paying for the First World War in 2015 is only half true. That covers the domestic debt. The roughly $4.4 billion Britain owed America for that same war. It defaulted during the Depression, and by the best research available, never fully repaid it. So even the closed bill isn't fully closed. The dishonesty isn't a modern invention, we just got more efficient at it. If you're finding this useful, the quiet machinery underneath the headlines, that's the whole job of this channel. A subscribe costs you nothing, and unlike a war, you can cancel it. Now, how does any of this reach a Kiwi at a Z station on a Tuesday morning? Through the Bowser. Through the one tax nobody ever had to announce. Here is your concrete fact, and it's a local one. In New Zealand, the fuel excise is 70.024 cents a litre. On top of that sits roughly 18 cents of carbon charge through the emissions trading scheme, 6 cents of ACC levy, and a couple of smaller levies. And then, the masterstroke, 15% GST is charged on the whole lot. Tax on a tax. By mid-2024, that stacked up to over $1.20 a litre going to the government, close to half of every dollar you spend. The Automobile Association has fought the tax on tax for years and got nowhere, because the whole point is that you can't see it. That invisibility isn't an accident. It has a name. Economists call it the Mill hypothesis, the fiscal illusion. A tax baked into a shelf price is systematically underfelt, while income tax, the visible kind, gets people marching in the streets. So a government that wants more of your money, with less of your anger, reaches for the invisible lever every single time. No minister has ever had to stand up and say, "We are raising your income tax to pay for this." The pump does the lying for them, and this lever was forged in war. The American federal gas tax began in 1932 as a temporary 1-cent depression patch, due to expire the following year. It never expired. Instead, in 1941, it was made permanent and raised, specifically to help fund the war build-up. A temporary tax became a war tax, became forever. In Britain, fuel money was once notionally tied to roads, until Churchill raided that fund in 1926. He scorned the idea that fuel money belonged to the roads, warning that if you let it, motorists would soon claim the moral ownership of the roads their contributions had created. The ring fence came down, and the money poured into the general account, the account that pays for everything, including the next war. So which way is the lever moving here? Both ways, quietly. Which is the honest answer? In Britain, they've frozen fuel duties since 2011. A stealth cut the budget office values at around £120 billion in foregone revenue. In New Zealand, the excise is mid-transformation, being phased toward tracked electronic road user charges, while Auckland's regional fuel tax was scrapped in mid-2024. The point was never that they always hike it. The point is that they move it without ever asking you, and here's where being at the bottom of the world really bites. We deleted our own refinery. Marsden Point stopped refining in March 2022, so New Zealand now imports 100% of its fuel, around 80% of it from South Korea and Singapore. We are a pure price taker. When Russia invaded Ukraine, 91 octane hit a record $3.09 a litre here. We didn't start that war. We don't have oil. We don't have an arms industry. We don't have a seat at the table. But the war premium landed on us anyway. Because our pump price is quoted in the world's war financing currency. Gulf states sell oil for US dollars. Those dollars get parked in US Treasury bonds. Saudi Arabia's holdings hit a record $149.5 billion by the end of 2025, part of a foreign pile of around $9.2 trillion that funds the American deficit. That money flows out as contracts to firms like Lockheed Martin, $71 billion in revenue, and RTX, over $80 billion. And their weapons get sold straight back to the same Gulf states that started the loop. A defense package of nearly $142 billion was announced for Saudi Arabia in 2025. And I'll flag, because honesty is the whole brand, that the viral version of this story, that some secret 50-year petrodollar deal expired in 2024, is false. There was no such treaty. The real scandal is duller and worse. A genuinely secret 1974 arrangement, exposed by Bloomberg only in 2016 after 41 years hidden, where the Saudis quietly recycled oil money into treasuries, and the Americans let them skip the normal auction in secret. Not a myth, a documented one. Put the scale next to ourselves. Global military spending hit a record $2.7 trillion in 2024. A single one of Lockheed's product lines dwarfs New Zealand's entire annual defense budget of $5 to $6 billion. You cannot vote in a US arms deal, you cannot influence what OPEC charges, but you fund both, a sliver at a time, every time you fill up. And the same Crown account your fuel GST flows into is the one now paying around $8.9 billion a year just in debt interest, and bankrolling a $12 billion defense buildup nobody at the pump voted for. So pull that receipt back out. Half of it is tax you never approved. The other half is a world price set by wars you can't see, in a currency you don't print, decided at a table you'll never sit at. The soldiers go home, or they don't come home at all, the headlines move on. But the bill keeps arriving, made out to whoever happens to be holding the nozzle. And at the very bottom of the world, with no oil and no vote, it turns out that's us.